What is the purpose of watching a horror documentary? Is it to learn? Sure. But what about horror documentaries that you want to revisit over and over again? Why do we do that? Well, I think there's a couple of reasons. Let's say you're in the mood to watch a horror film, but you're not sure which one. You peruse your movie shelves looking over a bunch of titles and seeing maybe 2 or 3 that you're like, oh, that's what I want to watch, but then another one pops up, oh, I want to watch that. Sometimes when you can't make up your mind, watching a horror documentary can kind of give you that fix when you can't make up your mind on which title you want to see. Another reason I think we watch horror documentaries is the comfort of it. There's something very relaxing about sitting down and watching a documentary going over a bunch of films that we know and love. God knows I love a good horror documentary. If you look online now, you'll find 3.5-hour documentaries on just one decade alone in the 1980s. That's the In Search of Darkness documentaries. They're really great and really comprehensive and go over a ton of titles. There's also older documentaries that came out during the 80s like Terror in the Aisles. Now that's a really cool one where Donald Pleasance himself is the host of the documentary. But what if you want to watch a horror documentary that doesn't just go over the 1980s? There are films from the 60s, 70s, 90s, 2000s, 50s that are really, really great with a rich history in America alone. Well, let me talk to you guys about a documentary called Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. So one time I'm on YouTube just perusing around and I thought to myself, I would love to watch a really fun documentary about horror movies. Sure enough, I came across this, Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. It had my attention because even on the thumbnail for YouTube at the time, it had the picture of Freddy's glove coming through an American flag. Being a big Freddy fanatic, that had my attention big time. As I started to watch this documentary, a few things really stood out to me that I find are extremely important. Number one is the tone of the documentary. I like a tone that's a little bit more on the creepier side with a more serious nature. One thing you'll notice about Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue is it's really going to have a tone that is dark, gritty, and intense, and that's something that I really like. Typically, I like things to be a little bit more light-natured, especially with horror comedies, which is my favorite subgenre, but I also love to get serious every now and again. And a horror documentary that'll take you down the path of a more darker, intense tone, going over the history of horror movies, to me, that is a match made in heaven. Now, one of the most important things of all time when it comes to a documentary, much less a horror documentary, is the narration. I prefer to have a voice talking me through a documentary rather than just a bunch of talking heads talking throughout a documentary, giving their perspective on certain things. Now, that's a mainstay that we see in a lot of horror documentaries today, where we talk about a movie and people come up on screen giving their recollection, or if they were actually involved in the film, giving their experience making the film. And that's not something that Nightmares Red, White, and Blue doesn't do, but what they do have is a narrator that nails it, and this may be one of the best narrations of a horror documentary I've ever seen. But to paint you a picture of some of my favorite ones, in one of the Halloween documentaries, none other than Dee Snider of Twisted Sister narrates the story of the making of Halloween, and he sets the tone as good as anything I've ever seen. Another one that's really, really great is in Halloween 25 Years of Terror. They got PJ Soles to talk you through the making of each Halloween film, and that one was done really well. But the best, and I mean the best horror narration I've ever heard in a documentary takes place in Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. And I'm not just saying this because this is one of my favorite actors. Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue was narrated by none other than movie legend Lance Henriksen. And what a job he does. This guy could have had a whole other career in narration and voice work alone. I'm sure that Lance Henriksen has done some voice work before and since, but his narration on Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue sets the tone like nothing I've ever seen before. Between the mix of the serious nature of the documentary and his narration, this is a surefire way to have you rewatching this over and over again. I may be alone in that. I don't know how you guys feel, but for me, the tone and the narration of a documentary is about the most important things you can have. So what is Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue? Well, based on the title, I'm sure you can figure out this is going over the horror movies made in America. But this goes from the start of horror in America up until post 9/11 movies. And that's another thing that I find really refreshing now looking back. Now, the first time I saw Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue, there wasn't In Search of Darkness. I didn't know about Terror in the Aisles. So a documentary that was just going over horror movies in America didn't seem all that special. But now looking back, I feel that Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue is a standout when you're thinking about a horror documentary to watch. Because even though I love 80s horror as much as the next guy, how many documentaries can you see about one decade? Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue will take you through an iconic journey of American horror. Seeing seeing this years and years ago was a really cool experience because I was able to learn about films that I had not seen yet. One particular moment that stands out for me is when they're talking about the film American Psycho. Now, I had heard about American Psycho, but it was not a movie I had been able to see yet. When they show the clip of Christian Bale running out of his apartment bare naked, covered in blood with a chainsaw, I remember thinking to myself, what in God's name is this? Another thing I really love about this documentary now is that it's somewhat vintage. I think this came out a little past 2006 or 7-ish. The DVD has a date of 2010, but it might have been a few years before that when it came out. What makes this documentary so special is that the people that were still with us in it. You've got, of course, legends like John Carpenter, but you also have people like Larry Cohen, who has passed on, Roger Corman, who is still alive and with us, and he's well into his 90s, and God bless you, Roger Corman, stick with us. You're an icon of cinema. And you also have people like George Romero talking in here, and it's always a pleasure to see George Romero in documentaries. Their memories were good, they were older, but they were not too old, so they could still recollect and talk really clear and well. John Carpenter actually comes across really cool in here because he doesn't just have to talk about Halloween, which makes this even more special. A happy John is a rare sight, and I loved him in Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue. It's not that this is so much a political documentary about horror, but it goes over what was going on in the world and how it was reflective on movies coming out during that time. Now, these are things we're somewhat privy to now, because when we look at movies like George Romero made, he's made it pretty clear that the movies he were making were kind of reflections of society at that time. And that's something I find very unique, because it's not just about the making of the movie, special effects artists, but they're really talking about the world and how horror movies affect the world and vice versa. So between that, a great narration from Lance Henriksen, a nice serious tone, and going over movies from the start of the horror genre up until today, that's really cool. What I really love is the latter part of the documentary where they talk about how movies post 9/11 had a drastic change in tone and how things became more bleak and dark and evil, and movies like Hostel and Saw were coming out. And it just goes to show that, you know, the world does kind of affect the movies that are made. All that being said, guys, I get asked every now and again what is one of the best horror documentaries out there. And without question, I would put Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue at the very top of the list. If this is not something you have seen, I absolutely urge you to go out of your way and either pick up this DVD, which is an unrated version, which makes it even more special, or try to seek it out online. It may be on YouTube, but I don't know if it's the unrated version on YouTube. The unrated version is a little bit longer, and of course they show things that are not supposed to be seen on television. Maybe there was also a TV release of this documentary that came on Sci-Fi or something back in the day. I'm not too sure. When I don't know what to watch and I want to watch a horror documentary, sure, I love my In Search of Darkness and I love Terror from the Isles, but when I think about one that's really going to get the job done and really kind of get under my skin a little bit in a good way, Nightmares in Red, White, and Blue is among the top of the list. If you've seen this documentary, I'd love for you to share your story about your experience with it, and if you haven't, you are welcome. You are going to love this. This is one of the best horror documentaries I've ever seen, and I think it deserves a new renaissance for people to go back and see it and try to bring it to a new audience. I'm just trying to do my part here, and I hope that this video reaches somebody that hasn't seen this documentary. Go out and check it out now, I promise. You're really going to love it. Get yourself a cold drink, a snack, grab your blanket, turn out the lights, and get transported through the years of American horror. Thank you guys for watching this video. This is your old pal CHH. Take care and enjoy the documentary. Huge giant thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. Without you guys, this would not be possible. To get behind the scenes photos, videos, music, private live streams, and much more, you can subscribe to my Patreon for as little as $1 a month. Thank you to my patrons.